All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is the 183rd Scientific Governance and Risk Meeting for MakerDAO. My name is Peyton. I go by Pros11 online, and I'm one of the governance facilitators here. On this call, I have a bunch of awesome people who both work for the Maker protocol and are interested in what's going on. This is our weekly meeting where we go over what is happening on the governance side and usually have some discussions about the risks the protocol is facing. We'll start with a couple of housekeeping matters just before we get into the agenda there. This is being recorded, as you might have noticed, so try not to speak over one another. You can both use the chat feature for Zoom or the raised hand function. If you're familiar with that, let us know that you have something to say and be happy to incorporate you into the speaking list or the flow of conversation. We want this to be an open meeting, so if you have questions, concerns, comments, please feel free to participate. I'm happy to speak your thoughts for you. If you're unable or unwilling to hop on the mic yourself, just drop it in the chat and we'll work them in. Awesome. So I mentioned we do have a bit of an agenda to get through. As usual, we'll start with a governance roundup, going through the votes, the MIPs, and the latest on the Maker Forum. There are no initiative updates today, so we'll skip straight into our discussion topic, which is perhaps a beefy one on tokenomics and growth for the protocol. Depending on how that discussion goes, we might have some time for open discussion afterwards. So if there's anything not related to what you've seen here on the screen, but you'd like to talk about, feel free to drop it in the chat and we will get to it if there's time after our discussion topic. Awesome. I think that more or less covers the basis, so we might as well get into it on the governance side. Was a extremely light week, perhaps the lightest week I've had since I started at Maker, with no weekly polls this week. There are, of course, still 9 ongoing ratification polls. Voting for those closes on Monday, and our MIP editor, Pablo, will be giving you an update following this. So we'll get further into those a little later. On the executive proposal side, we had no executive last week, so nothing that's been recently passed or executed. And tomorrow's is a bit of a light one as well, but it does perform some important functions. So you have a chance to read about it. I linked a forum topic there. Essentially, we need to be making some changes if the community approves. That will allow TUSD vault users to interact with their vault again. Essentially, the recent upgrade to the TUSD structure caused a lock from our perspective as a safety measure. So until we update their, what is it called? The implementation address? Yes, the implementation address. Until we update that, users would not be able to wind down or withdraw their collateral. So that is why it is getting inserted into the executive, even though it hasn't been pulled on recently. If you have questions on that, feel free to bring them up here or in the forum on that post would be a great place to do so. Like I said, pretty short week, so nothing else for me on the governance side. I'm going to kick it over to our MIP editor, Pablo, to give an update on the MIPs.
Thank you, Peyton.
Nope, your mic came in really well, Pablo, and then immediately cut out.
I don't know.
Oh, there you are.
Damn it.
I thought this was going to be the week.
Okay, so how is it now?
Much better. Go for it.
Okay, cool. So next slide, please. Okay, so first we have 2 sub-proposals that will enter the weekly cycle. They've already fulfilled their periods and will go on chain as polls on Monday 28th and run for 3 days. Next slide. As Peyton said, we have 9 ratification polls running that will close on Monday 28th. We have a lot of proposals to go through, and by the 3rd week in the governance cycle, I feel like we're more or less aware of what's going on. So I'm just gonna be quick. Next slide. So on this slide, we have 1 declaration of intent for investing in short-term bonds, 3 coordinated budgets for GovAlpha and for real-world finance, 2 keeper network onboardings. All of these are passing. Next slide, please. We have here one amendment to add a rapid payment mechanism to the bug bounty program run by Immunify Security. One facilitator of forwarding that should be ignored really because the MakerDAO shop facilitators have stepped down on their own accord. And one MIP 61 delegates, recognized delegates or compensation. This one is the only ratification poll that's currently not passing because it hasn't yet reached the minimum positive participation threshold of 10,000 MKR. We still have a couple of days. Next slide, please. So proposals in RFC galore. We have many of these. Next slide, thank you. So we have 5 MIPs rather than give a description of what each of these is. This time, I think it's better to just point you to the forum. MIP 69 is the only one out of this that is not eligible to enter April's cycle. Next slide. Thank you. We have coordinated budgets for governance communications, data insights, strategic happiness, and protocol engineering. Next slide. Thank you. We have one coordinated onboarding. These are the guys behind the MakerDAO event at ETH Denver. And by the way, in case you don't know, they've recently decided to withdraw their MKR compensation budget. Next slide. We have 2 amendments. Tim Black, Gala, and I are currently working on the coordinated onboarding process amendments, and I hope to have it ready for April, although that may be a bit of a stretch. And we have an amendment to MIP 7. MIP 7 is the onboarding and offboarding collateral domain teams MIP. This amendment will add a description of the role that collateral engineering services will play in the collateral onboarding workflow. Next slide, please. Finally, we have 2 mandate revisions for governance communications and for data insights. The addition also of the collateral engineering services into the collateral onboarding workflow, a modification of the collateral application form, and the dissolution of the content creation multisig. By the way, under Radon, this one will indeed be entering April cycle. And next slide, that's pretty much it. Reminder that the formal submission window for April opens on Monday, 4th. That's it from me. Thank you, guys.
Awesome. Appreciate it, Pablo. Any questions, obviously, forum posts or get in touch with our MIP editor. They do an awesome job. That'll bring us to our forum general updates. And I see Art, I'm ready to present those. Take it away.
Yep, I'm ready. Link up. All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the forum recap where we review announcements, discussions, and signal requests happening on the forum for the past week. And this time from March 17th to the 23rd. And we'll begin with our top announcements. Starting with Ruli from Centrifuge, who gave us an overview of the real world assets market on Aave. With a post that provides a time lapse of events and achievements and mentions how Centrifuge believes that a D3M for the real world asset market would be a great next step towards scaling the real world asset ecosystem. So check out the post. And next up, we have Leet, who published a comparison of staked ETH lending markets between Maker and Aave. And after comparing the value of stablecoin loans drawn against staked ETH and wrapped staked ETH collateral, approximately 132 million of staked ETH collateral on Aave and 41 million of stablecoin loans drawn against that could potentially be moved over to Maker if there's a desire to do so. And next up, we have GovAlpha introducing some new flowcharts on the Maker operational manual for governance flows and governance process selector. Also, for anybody who's not aware, the Maker operational manual and its updates also contain a Spanish translated version that's manually translated, thanks to the ambassador's program team. And now we're moving on to our top discussions. We have members of A16Z, including Luca Pro, who co-authored a 4-part proposal on innovating MakerDAO's token model. The team explores existing MKR tokenomics model and introduced a 3-pronged approach towards innovating it, which consists of adding utility functionality to the MKR token, aligning governance incentives, and increasing financial resiliency and fostering growth. All three proposals, including the overview, are summarized in the forum at a glance if you're looking for a quick TLDR. And next up, we have GovAlpha providing an overview about how they engage with forum management in response to inquiries about new accounts, suspected sock puppets, and forum moderation in general. The post also includes some community considerations and their own consideration of potentially running an informal poll about community feelings towards moderation. And finally, we have Frank Brinkemper offering informal polls regarding 3 different ways to help increase MakerDAO's competitive advantage in ETH and stake thief collateral, which include adding a stake thief vault type with a lower liquidation ratio, adding a stake thief vault type with a higher liquidation ratio, and investigating Aave interest-bearing ETH as collateral in Maker. And these informal polls will run until March 28th. And now we're moving on to our signal requests over the last week. There is only currently 1 active signal going on. Sebastian from Strategic Finance revisits the topic and attempts to push PAXG to be onboarded. All risk assessments for it have been submitted during 2020, and PAXG was previously approved for onboarding through a governance poll. Additionally, both market cap and liquidity for PAXG have significantly increased since then. And the Uni V2 pool, although small, was recently handling 2 million of hourly volume and 50 million on the daily. Parameters proposed for PAXG are a depth ceiling of 5 million, liquidation ratio of 125%, which may be set to 130, and a stability fee of 4% that may also be altered based on further review. Sebastian provides pros and cons of onboarding PAXG and asks the community whether they want to onboard it as a collateral type in the MCD. The signal will run until April 5th, and at the moment, the poll is looking successful with 65% of votes supporting the signal request. And that's it for the GNR version. Check out the forum at a glance written version for some more information, and also show some love on our new Medium account. I'm going to post the link up in a second.
Awesome. Thanks, Artem. Was just realizing the Medium account the other week and thought that was pretty neat. All right. So as I initially mentioned, we do not have any initiative updates today, so that'll take us straight into our discussion segment. And yeah, it is a bit of a large topic, but one we felt would be good to talk about here. And essentially, it's the tokenomics and growth proposals. If you've been watching the forums as of late, we've had a couple different tokenomics proposals. One submitted by Monet Supply. We had another that Porter posted from A16Z. And you could even say Rune kind of kicked off this recent meta of tokenomics proposals with the Sagittarius engine a few months back. In the midst of all that, we also had a post from kind of a cross-core unit group of actors about aggressive growth strategy for Maker. So yeah, this is essentially our discussion segment to kind of collate all these different ideas, talk about both what are good tokenomics fundamentals to have, how we should be evaluating different proposals that come forth, and in general, how we should be structuring our governance decisions, our community involvement to kind of shape the growth of the protocol. I know there are a few people on this call who have proposed, whether it be tokenomics revisions or growth plans. So definitely invite them to talk about their framing for proposing those and why they thought that was necessary. Cool. And I see Porter raising your hand, so I'll pass it to you before I mumble anything.
Thanks, Peyton. Hey everyone, I'm Porter Smith. I work for A16Z on the investing team and the network operations team. I've met many of you, but for those I haven't met, wonderful to meet Albert on Zoom. So just want to provide some quick context on kind of how we look at this, why we did a tokenomics proposal in the first place, and also recognize the prioritization efforts here of scarce engineering resources and kind of our take on that. So overall, we basically came forward with this tokenomics proposal that we've been working on for actually quite a while. It just takes a while to get through kind of the regulatory and compliance process on our end before posting something publicly. The main thrust of kind of what we're interested in doing, I think, is adding utility functionality to tokens, which we think provides a new regulatory dimension to the tokens. And I think that's kind of just important context for everyone to understand. I think we completely recognize that adding or changing tokenomics can be a complex endeavor and one that requires engineering resources. I think for us, it's a much longer term focus. It's not something, excuse me, that needs to be done necessarily in the next week or anything like that. But it's something that we think structurally is important long term, and we're very long term oriented, which is why we proposed it. The second thing I'd like to just provide more context on is a little bit on that regulatory side. We think it's important, if a token has utility functionality, that it adds new dynamics to how it might be perhaps analyzed from the regulatory perspective. And so there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. We just put some ideas out there about ways that could be interesting. There's certainly pros and cons to those ideas. We recognize that. I don't think we're married to any of them. That was just kind of the best stuff that we happened to come up with, but more than happy to get, feedback. We'd love to hear what everyone thinks. The last piece is I know Monet Supply and then Sam put out some other proposals recently as well. We're totally flexible and more than happy to integrate or just whatever's a good idea I think we're interested in. We just, I think, bring a little bit of a unique regulatory look at things. And so a lot of times if we phrase things a certain way or do things a certain way, that is generally what's driving it, just for context on that. But more than happy to discuss further with anyone. Would love to hear everyone's ideas on it. We're very laid back with this. If everyone thinks it's terrible, like no big deal. We just wanted to kind of put it out there and generate ideas. And that's kind of all I had, Peyton. So with that, I'll just turn it over to the group for other comments.
Awesome. Thanks, Porter. We really appreciate you coming on and giving us that synopsis. If you have questions specifically for Porter, now would be a good time. But also if you have questions or framing for the entire discussion, would welcome any comments there.
Hey, Porter, Frank here, 3F delegate. I had a chance to read some of the proposals you put up. And I guess I wanted to hear from you. What are your thoughts on the surplus buffer? How's your team thinking about expanding the surplus buffer? And with regards to regulations, how does that fall into the whole picture of what you just talked about a second ago? And kind of having the tokenomics of MKR kind of fit the mold that makes sense, not necessarily for everyone in the world, but more for Americans like myself and you. But yeah, more on the surplus buffer. Just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. I think we're going to do like a written response to that proposal. We just got to kind of route it through some of our regulatory and legal folks first. I think in general, we view having a large surplus buffer as the right thing to do. And fundamentally, when you're in a growth stage of a startup, kind of like where MakerDAO is now, it becomes a capital allocation question of what should you be spending kind of hard-earned retained earnings on? Should it be on growth or on backstopping, perhaps some sort of black swan event, or on other items? And so for us right now, I think what makes the most sense is to just continue to kind of pool that capital and to kind of have that ammo at the community's disposal to set forth on any channels that they see appropriate. But the first step in that process is just having a much larger surplus buffer. And then that allows a lot of flexibility, I think, on the community's end to either direct it towards growth initiatives or as an insurance backstop. And so real quick, one idea that we kind of put out there as part of our proposal was this idea of a secondary surplus buffer. And what's important about that is it's denominated in the native MKR token, which we recognize is certainly not ideal compared to a cash-based insurance buffer for obvious reasons, the volatility of the token, and the fact that if something goes wrong, that insurance buffer may be worth quite a bit less than you initially anticipated. And so I think for us, what was interesting about it though, is if you stake MKR in this secondary surplus buffer, you're actively participating in the enterprise. And if you earn cash-based or DAI-based yield for actively participating in the enterprise and putting your assets at risk, from a regulatory perspective, at least in the United States, that's a great way to be able to kind of distribute some of that value to token holders, because they're actively participating in the enterprise and they are putting their own assets at risk. They're not relying solely on the efforts of others, which is some of the key language I'm sure many of you have heard before. So that's kind of the idea behind the secondary surplus buffer, just to tack on there, Frank, but more than happy to go further in depth on anything there that might be helpful.
And just to clarify, you're more of a proponent of handing out. So for example, if we do stake Maker as Money Supply has proposed, are you folks more in favor of accruing MKR rewards or more of paying out DAI, sort of like dividends? Kind of want to get your stance on that.
Yeah, I think there's two things there. The first piece is any sort of, I am not a lawyer and our legal folks would have to answer this. I just want to be clear about that up front. But I think that we would be more interested perhaps in the cash or DAI denominated distributions for regulatory reasons. And then I think on the surplus buffer piece in general, again, that's just a capital allocation question. And I think we'd like to just see as large of a surplus buffer as possible right now, while the community figures out perhaps the right directions to go on the allocation front. And that just enables that flexibility. So I've talked to a lot of folks. I think a lot of folks are kind of in somewhat of the same boat. I know that Maker's had, certain policies that have been in place for a while that have made sense, and perhaps it makes sense to continue them. But in our eyes, kind of maintaining a larger surplus buffer might make a lot of sense.
Got it. Thank you.
Thanks for the questions there, Frank, too. I know one criticism we've seen online when these different tokenomics models come on is on basically a neutral way to frame this, but essentially the tax on people that aren't paying attention, right? Like if you change a tokenomics model, you make it so people who participate get more rewards than those who either aren't paying attention or otherwise blocked from participating. You kind of dilute them. So I'm not sure if that might be a good thing to discuss, whether it be fixed with certain time requirements, or if there's just a general philosophy there that we could talk about.
Yeah, just really quickly. I mean, that's a great point, Peyton. We certainly understand that. I mean, I think there's a balance to be had where you want to incentivize active participation and reward folks that are actively contributing in a meaningful way to the community. So kind of on that front, another thing that we kind of put in there was this idea of creating an MKR denominated vesting pool for folks that are delegates and also for folks that are just active voters that aren't delegates, so that their incentives are aligned in ways similar to just how employees would be at any other startup, because Web3 is fundamentally different because everyone is kind of actively participating and in some respects to varying degrees members of kind of an active startup. And so that was kind of some of our thoughts there, but there's certainly balance to be had where you don't want to just strictly have rewards go to certain folks and not others.
Hi, Peyton, thanks. I wanted to hear from folks in engineering around the resource question and just hear folks' thoughts about priority. It feels like this conversation around changing the tokenomics may be correlated with an uptick in the MKR price the other week. And if there's a sense that addressing this issue, progressing the tokenomics could even in of itself be positive for all the other things we're trying to achieve in terms of attracting counterparties and improving, just across all the dimensions that we're trying to grow. So I just love to hear in this conversation in terms of the resource question and prioritization, how people are thinking about this.
think, yeah, that's a great question. So from my perspective, and Derek from Protocol Engineering, I think it's really a question here where we need to understand the requirements, frame the problems we're trying to resolve, and then map out what this means from a governance of voting perspective, and the work that would have to go into creating essentially a new chief contract, which we would use, which is not a problem. It's just that effort needs to be mapped out in terms of requirements and understanding what the impacts are going to be, and then how it plays out across the rest of the ecosystem. So yeah, aligning on these different opportunities and documenting them as a concise list of requirements, I think would be very useful. But that's going to take some discussion and get to. But certainly happy to play a role and be involved in that. Yeah, but happy for others to add input as well.
So yeah, none of these plans are free, obviously, and some of them involve very major, like fundamental changes to the core system and Maker token itself. So we currently have mandates, or at least guidance, to deploy on every viable L2, prepare D3Ms for everybody that we can, work to streamline the RWA process from a technical level, and then just generally, protocol maintenance. So I do see that this will be a big interrupt on the resources, and it would have effects on other core initiatives. It's just there's a whole bunch of competing proposals right now, so it's hard to speak to any of them because we don't know which way people are gonna go.
Yeah, and I would say that's certainly like a governance concern as well, right? Like we want proposals to be able to be addressed and understood before we make the changes. And it's like an unfortunate situation we've had in the past, right, where things have been approved by governments and then we don't really have a timeline. We don't really know like when, if ever, they're going to be integrated. And usually it comes from a lack of communication, right? In that we haven't fully scoped out what the work would entail before bringing it to vote. I see some good comments here on the sideboard, kind of comparing growth versus tokenomics. I don't know if anyone wanted to hop on the mic and kind of speak to that, I guess, perceived dichotomy, right, of needing to invest more in one versus the other.
I mean, I'll jump in here and get on my soapbox just a little bit if people tolerate that. So I'm Kurt from Protocol Engineering. There's this like classic debate of like, to what extent are tokenomics improvements actually a growth mechanism versus something that's secondary to actual growth. And I've gone through a personal journey where a year and a half ago I was very excited about changing tokenomics. To the point where, after thinking about it all that time, I'm now really not all that excited about it at all, because it's just sort of become clear to me from the market, and this is my personal opinion here, that there's really only one thing that matters, and that's scaling. And finding ways to grow the DAI supply and expand to L2s or wherever the economic activity is happening, so that DAI can become an integral component of the Web3 crypto economy, whatever you want to call it. I just don't see a world where the reason Maker succeeds or fails is because it didn't upgrade its tokenomics to be, more appealing to this or that stakeholder, or, have a little more or a little less, regulatory component in some particular direction. So personally, I view the tokenomics as, at best, like a tertiary concern, compared to scaling and security and, growing business efforts like real world assets. Because at the end of the day, the Maker token still retains the rights to all future cash flows and present assets of the system. And, that's completely sufficient to value, a financial asset, no matter what form capital return takes, and, can always be changed in the future. And in particular, a lot of these changes that have been proposed are like very sweeping things that are big investments. And, once you make a very big investment like that, sometimes you get locked into it because then in the future, there's not time to go back and redo it. And, I think we should just think very carefully before we, make any large changes to the tokenomics in the short term, at least. But at the end of the day, governance sets the priorities for whatever protocol engineering works on. So, if there's a disagreement there, however the voting weight falls is what we do. So that's my rant. Sorry if it was a little long. Thanks.
As far as rants go, very well put together. Thank you, Kurt. Looks like I see Justin with his hands up. Go for it.
Thank you, Peyton. Apologize in advance for my voice, a little bit under the weather right now. I must largely agree with the last two speakers on the cost of engineering for the tokenomics model. From the conversations I've been having with different core units, the proposals I've been seeing, I don't see tokenomics itself as a hindrance to growth now. Nobody has raised that as an issue and as a problem. So I think with the pretty major backlog that we have on some of the projects right now, I think it's prudent to at least push these kinds of proposals further down the timeline to capitalize on other kinds of growth. At least that's my take on it at the current time.
Yeah, thank you, Justin, and go for it, Porter.
Just to jump back in here quickly, thank you very much, Justin and Kurt, for the perspectives there. I don't think we're looking at this at all as something that needs to be done in the short term. I think we're looking at this as trying to figure out just longer term priorities. I think we always defer generally to engineers and engineering talent on perhaps what needs to be done on that side of the house. And as far as strategy goes, I think we look at this as much more of just a long-term thing for community discussion. That perhaps once we get past some of these, I think, core growth initiatives that are occurring right now, could be tackled down the line. So I just wanted to make that clear. We're not looking to do anything immediately. We're not looking to displace current initiatives. I think we understand that. And it was more just to foster some general discussion around some of these ideas for things that hopefully aren't core revamps of the token, but perhaps new ways to use it. I understand like installing a secondary surplus buffer perhaps might involve significant engineering work. But some of the other ideas, like just permanently increasing the current surplus buffer, et cetera, I think are things that we were looking to implement more in the medium term.
Excellent, thank you. And MakerMan, let's see, go for it.
Hey Porter, thanks. I'm a bit under the weather. I'm really tired, so bear with me for a little bit. So I've been looking at the history a little bit here, and we're kind of talking about an engine, right? Maker itself is an engine for financial achievement, so to speak, right? And I was kind of thinking a lot about growth, and then I see the proposals for like, let's increase the surplus buffer so we can do 100 million deals. And I'm like, I'm back to the same question when MCD came out. Are we really going to get to 1 billion with a 1 in 10 million deal, right? I look at the last year, it's like, what was growth like? What dominated growth? WBTC, the PSM, and ETH basically going up a factor of 20. Those are the 3 key things that did our growth. And when I look at that, can we do that another factor of 10 using the existing engine? And if we really think we're going to have 60 billion of USDC as like one of our core components of growth, I don't think it really works. I look at where real world's at, right? I just don't. My issue here is that I think that we're trying to run on a car on an engine that's kind of old, and we need to look at our competition. My thinking is we really need to look at a Maker 3.0, and I can hear the groans from protocol engineering, because when I look across the space, how many different things can we do that can really supercharge this protocol when we're limited by a surplus that basically, even if we can grow that to 250 million, we're still doing 100 to maybe 200 million things that may or may not grow to billions. And then we're still going to have the same problem with the surplus buffer. I keep thinking we got to do a Maker 3.0 and we got to recapitalize to the tune of $1 billion to 10 billion, so that, you know, when I think that we could do maybe 10 deals a year, and I think that's challenging, we need to be doing these deals in the 1 to 10 billion range, not the 100 million range, right? And so, you know, when I think about growth, I kind of want to segregate and focus on what we can do with the engine now with Maker 2.0, and make a core group that's nimble and think about, you know, look at the competition and figure out how to raise capital. I have a crazy idea. It's a Maker 3 token with 1 trillion minted that's worth $1 that we back. And then we VC that out for $1 billion or 2 or 3 of capital and drive a whole new Maker 3 system into place that uses Maker 2, feeds Maker 2, but also creates Maker 3. And so I just look at this and I think we're struggling with too many issues. And one of them is capitalization. The other one is like operational, being able to do deals, right? And we're struggling kind of piecing together on an old facility, and we really want to change things, which is a long-term vision, but we also want to strategize on the old, and we're having difficulty doing that. And so I would like to see an approach that's a little more forward thinking and bigger than what's being proposed. So that's kind of all I got. Thanks.
Appreciate it, Makerman. And you bring up a good point there in terms of there being a lot of different factors to consider and things going on at once, right? Like for the tokenomic side, for instance, where right now, yes, the price isn't a pressing concern, right, of the MKR token in terms of system stability. But if our total value locked were to keep increasing, then all of a sudden there can, you know, be a real vulnerability there when the market cap of the governance token is far lower than all the assets it secures, right? The other thing potentially that I heard from Porter is this idea of kind of regulatory security, right? The idea that like, well, if there are things you can be doing to make your token safer from a regulation standpoint, you know, that adds some value or some pause for consideration as well. So definitely trying to balance a multitude of factors here, even just moving forward with the discussion. And yeah, that's why we appreciate a wide variety of impact. And yeah, speaking of, see a new person looking to join the conversation, go for it, Robert.
Hey, thanks, Peyton, and hi, everyone. I just want to jump in here and set some context because I hear growth and there's you know, I've posted in the forums as far as understanding and agreeing of where we're at in the organizational life cycle, right? I think we're in a growth phase, and I agree with Porter in some of the comments that he's made. And from the beginning efforts of collateral engineering services, I talked about productization and products, and I'm hoping this is becoming a little bit clearer now because we have a lot of technology, and one of the challenges that we have is that we sometimes try to find homes for this technology in search of a solution. And as we go forward and we look at our collateral, it's really quite the opposite, where we'd like to look at the use cases and understand the business behind what we're doing with the DAI, how it's generated, and where, quite frankly, is that when we invest our time and money, we're the best places to put that. So a lot of that has to do with the market analysis and looking at the quote unquote competition and other things. And don't get me wrong, I know a lot of people have done a lot of work there, but bringing this together from a product perspective and asking ourselves, what is it that we need to build to grow the protocol? And a lot of that's focused on collateral, and a lot of that is focused in other areas. But I just wanted to share a few comments there to give you my perspective of how at CES we're looking at our collateral and continuing to productize that. So thanks very much.
Appreciate that perspective there, Robert. So I feel like we've talked a lot, kind of more on the tokenomics side of things I was curious if anyone from the group that put forward the aggressive growth strategy post, if there's anything you'd like to say or present in this call, might be a good time to do so. But all comments are also welcome as well. So if my preempting didn't fit what you wanted to say, but you have a comment, feel free to go for it anyway. About as much silence as I can take, so I'll throw a few more things out there. I know at the start of the call, Wouter was making some points about a separated operations buffer, if I'm not butchering the terminology behind that. I don't know if you'd like to speak to that, Wouter, or not, but that is certainly a concept for growth we can be considering, right? Like currently, because of the structure of the SV. Yeah, I don't need to explain this too much. I see Wouter coming online. Go for it.
I don't think there's a lot to say because it's quite simple. Right now, the surplus buffer, it serves multiple purposes. And with the discussions about growth that we've had, we need to think about like how can we even start setting a direction, and how can we be more purposeful about the growth, make a plan, and then make sure that the necessary resources are available. A plan that has a longer term outlook rather than just month by month. And from a very practical point of view, the problem you immediately run into is that right now we can't meaningfully speak about our runway because everything is in the surplus buffer and it's not separated by these different purposes. So from a practical point of view, I just think that yeah, a quite simple fix would be to start setting aside the runway for the operational expenses and separate it from the rest of the surplus buffer. That's almost certainly a requirement if we want to become better at long-term planning. And this is a theme that I noticed throughout all of these discussions. There's a lot of confusion around what is short-term, what is long-term. Yeah, to structure these discussions, I think it's incredibly important to separate the two. And I think the comment made by Porter that, you know, this is a long-term thing. When we see the discussion, it doesn't really, we're not really taking that into account, right? Like we need to be able to have these long-term discussions. Engineering cost, for example, is something that, of course, it's important to know what the cost will be ultimately, but we shouldn't look at our current backlog and say, oh, well, it's not a priority if we're having a long-term discussion. The question how we will then fit this into our roadmap is a different question, and we need to separate these things to have meaningful discussions. So yeah, I think this would be a very simple change to simply start separating the operational runway from the rest of the surplus buffer, and I think it would help us tremendously in our ability to start thinking more long-term and working on long-term roadmaps.
Thanks, Matthew. And for those who didn't read or aren't familiar with the growth strategy plan, right? An aspect of that was either selling debt or equity in hopes of financing operations. So it's pretty relevant to the topic here. See, Juan came unmuted. If you have something to add.
Yeah, I wanted to add that I don't know if my mic works well. Hopefully it does.
You're pretty quiet and distant sounding.
I'm using Pablo's microphone. No, so I wanted to add that a lot of core units, including ours, we're asking for buffers and runways and whatnot, and potentially that could be pulled together if necessary. I'm not entirely sure on the implementation or the execution, but that should be at least accounted in a different way when we're thinking about what the operational expenses actually are and what the cash flow is. So they're two different things. Hopefully, if a coordinator is running into their buffer very often, maybe they should review their budget. But that's, I think these are important topics to be separated, because it's very hard to make decisions or to have a clear picture of what our finances look like. So yeah, we should definitely look into that.
I think one of the reasons I'm not totally sold on the hypergrowth model is that there's not a real good plan laid out for what to do with those hundreds of millions of DAI just sitting there, right? Like we talk about capital efficiency, and I know that I can use returns much better than letting them sit in a pool. But on the other hand, that pool itself can be a target, a honeypot, or a slush fund even for new core units, for overly aggressive spending, or just things that are not intended right now. And there's not any real limitation on how that can be used in the future. I mean, even an exploit could just drain that thing. So some separations of where that money goes, maybe to a separate backstop pool or something like that, where it's differentiated from the pile, would be a little more reassuring.
Thanks for that perspective, Brian. And I see Justin with your hand again. Go for it. You're still muted if you're trying to talk.
Thank you, Peyton. I just want to expand a little bit on what Michael here brought up. I think there is a lot of demands going to the surplus buffer. It kind of started out as this essentially as a security thing, and then it kind of everybody got their hooks into it. So having some sort of separation to make sure that we maintain that security bit of it and protect that one from ongoing expenses and other issues, I think that's a thing worth following. Also, one thing that I am concerned about is not just the size of the pool itself, but also the rate of inflow into the surplus buffer, because that has been steadily going down the past few months, and I think we need to address that issue as well as how much is actually in there, because if that one dips into the negative, which is a very real possibility, if it just turns into a real bear market, then we basically we have too many obligations to it to actually make this work. I mean, we have to cover our running expenses. We have to make sure the protocol stays safe. We even want to spend the same money, so to speak, on growth initiatives, and that's simply not possible. At some point, there's too many obligations for too little capital. So I think the most immediate concerns will be to have to try to increase the rate of inflow into our surplus buffer. And that means that's essentially two ways of doing that. One is increasing our revenue, the other one is decreasing our costs. And I fear we have to look at both going forward.
Taking the other side of that trade, I think if you look at the aggressive growth proposal by our community members, it talks about the risk that the protocol is going to be taking on pretty soon, right? One of them is obviously the Starknet bridge, and also the other two bridges, Arbitrum, Optimism, et cetera. And then you also have other things that we're going to be doing hopefully in the near future, which I know I've been waiting for what seems forever, such as onboarding RWA collateral types. So, yeah, I get it that a surplus buffer maybe should be set to one side where it's maybe protected by a different smart contract. But if we're going to take all these risks, right? You just had someone, Solana and Jump Trading and the rest of the folks over there take a $300 million hit, and it was covered pretty quickly because of the Solana wormhole. So I think when you look at the proposal, you really need to kind of dig in and see what exactly the authors were trying to point out to the community is that we're going to be taking on a lot of risk coming up. And somehow, some way, I personally don't want to relive March 2020. That was not fun at all. So I'm a big proponent of not only having a pretty large cushion of a surplus buffer, but whatever you guys decide to do as far as, allocating it to operational growth or having as an insurance fund, et cetera, whatever you guys want to call it, I'm all for that. But just wanted to point that out.
Appreciate it, Frank. Nice to have a kind of dueling perspective of some of our recognized delegates. I see Nadia with her hand raised, who's both the co-author of that aggressive growth proposal and the facilitator for our growth core unit.
Yeah, I think I was listening to what Brian said, and I think we have a lot of ideas of why we need a higher surplus buffer. First of all, we really need to expand in a multi-change strategy. I think all the efforts that we're doing now about having maker bolts on Optimism, Arbitrum, and Starknet are awesome. But why not having maker bolts in Polygon and any other side chain where we see there are a lot of that we can do something to grow that market. So for me, we really need to increase the surplus buffer to achieve that, because right now, and this is something I discussed with Sam when we thought about this, if you see all the DAI that we have in Polygon, it is about 200 million DAI, I think. And with the current surplus buffer, it will be impossible for us to accept that amount of DAI minted through the maker bolts and and replace the POS DAI on Polygon for the canonical DAI that we will mint with the maker bolt. So if we are not able to replace that amount of DAI on Polygon, I think it doesn't make that much sense to deploy maker bolts in Polygon. So I think that at least when we wrote that proposal, increasing the surplus buffer was because we are thinking on creating new products and services around the maker. Of course, we know that we also have to create more core units, because I suppose that if we want to deploy maker on Polygon, we will need a team dedicated on Polygon, same as what we are doing with Starknet. But I really think that we have to be more strategic on the costs associated to core units and all these DAI that we will have in the new and higher surplus buffer. It's more to support growth of the protocol by new collaterals, by adding new domains, having vaults in different side chains and layer 2s. Also, we all want to grow the real world assets initiative, because that's part of maker strategy. To do that, again, we need a higher surplus buffer. So I think that is why we thought about increasing the surplus buffer. And I agree with what Adrian wrote in the chat. We have to review how we are going to spend that surplus buffer, because the idea is to use it to help the protocol to grow in the services that we are providing. But we have to be careful and not spending it on 1 million of new core units, but without new things that we implement in the protocol. I think that we have to be careful about that.
Yeah, not just to be clear, I didn't mean we shouldn't have a higher surplus buffer, and I think we need one just in light of the amount of collateral we've got on board. But the concern is just that when we get those large numbers, we probably want assurances to ourselves that they'll actually be used for those things, and then just not like dipped into to add a whole bunch of new people. And we will need to add new people, but I guess we want to make sure that it's going to be used as a risk buffer and not a runway.
Yeah, I completely agree. Completely agree.
And I think you're kind of touching on potential criticism of our current tokenomics model, right, Brian? Is that, essentially we design it so that we take profits and we give it back to MKR holders by method of buying back shares and burning, or buying back tokens and burning. However, if we are to stop profits from accruing, then that value goes to the people that are insiders of the system rather than to the token holders that are supporting the potential risks of our collateralization.
Exactly. Thank you.
Yeah, that's like, one perspective, right? There's many different perspectives to have, but I think like oftentimes the kind of middle ground between these competing ideas is going to be the most prudent decision. So appreciate you bringing that forward. Right, I know this is like a large topic and it's somewhat nebulous in that it touches on just about all areas of our operation. So I definitely don't want to cut discussion of it short. But with that said, do you want to make sure if there are other things we want to talk about, we have a chance for that as well. So if you have anything you wanted to say but haven't had a chance to say yet regarding tokenomics and growth models, now might be the time to do so. All right, feel fairly good ushering us along then. I've seen several kind of good potential side topics come up in the chat. I don't know if there are any ones that we'd like to fully explore, but one that kind of keeps coming up, I saw it in your comment there, Josh, is this idea of recognized delegates and what their role is within the system. Obviously, several of you are on this call and are participating, so you might have some thoughts there as well. But the recognized delegates essentially are a different group of stakeholders, right? Like we hear primarily from core units and core unit facilitators as one part of stakeholders of our DAO system. But recognized delegates are the newest kind of addition to our organizational model. And there has been some good threads. Kianga posted a good thought response there in terms of what recognized delegates' responsibilities could be. Yeah, so you can unmute it, so take it away.
Yeah, I mean, just a subset of that conversation. As we're talking about tokenomics, my question to community is whether there's value in having a voter or delegate that sort of remains neutral in the sense of doesn't have a view necessarily, but tries to respond to what it feels like the community needs or wants, with kind of the delegates, bringing the delegates' perspective to the conversation versus a more active delegate. All of us involved in the space have experience and have views of where we'd like to see Web3 go, DeFi, Maker in particular, and could very easily have a point of view that we try to persuade the community about. And if that's kind of the mode, I've definitely heard from in some conversations the sense that like the delegates should be working in terms of like proposing things and advocating for things. And I'm just curious to hear on this call, in this context, if that's a strong sense that people have about the delegate role. And I think I kind of have approached this work a little bit from call it judiciary mode, where it's like, okay, I just want to hear both sides, hear all sides, and kind of be that disinterested party that tries to help, the community come to the best result based upon a certain set of standards that have been kind of pre-communicated and agreed by the community.
If I can react to this, because I think it's probably the most critical point at this moment. We talk a lot about the need for vision and strategy. When we talk about growth, it immediately leads back to that. And the question is, of course, who will create that vision and strategy, and how do we connect it to the operations? And that's where I think maybe the biggest change is needed. I'm personally a big proponent of delegates clearly stating their platform, their vision, and their political agenda, and then being elected based on that. And I think that's it will introduce two new dynamics. One is that it will help tremendously with this great need for vision and strategy, so that we can align our efforts towards a long-term goal. And second, on the other side of the equation, it will also reduce the tendency to micromanage, because the alternative, if delegates are not outspoken about the vision and the strategy that they want to follow, then the alternative is that if things go wrong, there is a great tendency to micromanage. And definitely now we're seeing the limits of the budget. This is one of the big risks, is that we flip towards micromanagement, and we need to learn how we can work more efficiently. And so I think that's all very important. But the other thing that is important is that core units, for example, retain a large degree of independence, because in a decentralized organization, things will simply not work if we try to combine certain tools from the centralized world. And if we're not careful, we'll end up with the worst of both worlds, rather than leveraging the strengths of a decentralized organization. And so when there is a need for correction, the question is, how do you do it? And I think today, this may be one of the missing pieces, is the hesitation, which is very understandable, but some hesitation from delegates to clearly state their platform and push for a certain direction, and try and convince MKR holders that this is the right direction to go. So I personally think this is probably the most important thing that we can change right now to progress on a lot of the issues that we're seeing, is to start thinking about real delegate platforms, and also clear differences in opinion between delegates. I think delegates sometimes put too much effort in agreeing about everything. I think it's perfectly fine for delegates to disagree. In fact, it should be very clear when they disagree, so that MKR holders can make a clear choice. And yeah, I think that might be the next phase that we need to progress with a lot of the issues that we're seeing, as I said.
Thanks, Vader. I appreciate that reflection. I was just wondering, like, structurally, I think in some ways we kind of set up the delegates to almost search for that consensus, right? For those of you that remember, before we had recognized delegates, like, often it was a pain to get executive proposals passed, right? So there'd be kind of more than a week where we'd be left waiting to see, all right, well, this change that we consisting of all things that have previously been polled and voted and approved, is this actually going to take place, or are we going to suffer because we don't have enough people to activate it?
Yeah, if I can add to that, so that I think that is another confusion, which is the role of an executive proposal. I don't think if all the due processes are followed and there has been, the correct MIP procedure is in place to make sure that delegates were able to vote on the governance polls, etc. The executive vote really is just it's signing the deployment of the functionality. It's a very different. It's almost a technical role, and I think it's I mean, there is like a safety feature there that's the measure of last resort to stop malicious changes to the protocol, of course. But I do think it needs to be separated from from the political disagreements, because it's more like an operational role of signing the deployment that happens.
Thanks, Wouter. Justin, I see you with the hand raised. Go for it.
I'll actually remember to unmute myself this time. I do agree that I think delegates has a role to play in setting a strategic plan. I do not think they should do it alone. However, I think primarily this should actually come from maker holders themselves, right? The delegates are merely carrying out the will of the maker holders. And the big strategic picture is essentially what is maker all about, what are we trying to achieve, and that should actually in many cases be sourced from the maker holders or from the community. So providing such a plan should at least have some sort of input from outside of the delegates themselves, I think, and it should probably be a collaboration effort. Maybe delegates are the ones most or best positioned to actually start that work. That might very well be the case. And also, I'm also a little bit wary about the whole separation of powers issue here. If you empower delegates to sit down and sort of dream up their own suggestions and then go and vote on them, you're essentially short-circuiting everything else out from the decision process. Because they, as you can see from the current votes here going, it's almost all delegates carrying the votes through the different proposals. I'm a little bit wary about that part as well. Just wanted to put that one out there.
Yeah, apologies for taking up a lot of speaking time here, but I think these are extremely important points. So first of all, I'm in total agreement about that. It should not happen in a vacuum, right? And yes, delegates ultimately are supposed to work for MPR holders, and it's the MPR holders ultimately who should make the decision which vision and strategy is followed. But this is exactly what an election mechanism is for, right? A political party in a democracy, how it works is it creates a platform, it talks to its electorate, it looks at possibilities for execution, it summarizes everything in a vision and strategy that they believe reflects the wishes of the electorate, and hopefully has a realistic plan of succeeding. And that is what is presented and that is voted on. And this is how this will is expressed. So I don't think there is a contradiction between delegates making up their own plans and MTR holders making the ultimate decision. In fact, I think they work in the same, that they're one and the same. Like, if the plan is clearly articulated, then MTR holders do have a choice. Whereas if the plan is not articulated, MTR holders, they're voting blindly, and they need to spend a lot more time and the time that they don't have to maybe come up with something themselves, but that's not their role. Like, they don't have the time for that. They're not full-time working for MakerDAO. So I think the two are closely related, and it would be beneficial for delegates to state their their vision, their strategy that they believe will resonate with the MKR voters, and will also have a realistic execution plan. The other point about voting on your own proposals, that one I do agree with, and I think it goes into the micromanagement aspect. It's one thing to define a vision and a strategy. I think the other part should be supporting core units and execution plans, right? Which is a different thing. Be like making very specific proposals about how something should be done, or trying to dictate how experts should be doing their work. That is going in the wrong direction, but I think it topples on the side of micromanagement, and that is the concern. Of course, there are clear, like more direct risks, as in if you have enough voting powers, then you can, because of this, the possibility to put up an executive vote and vote on it yourself. There definitely is a possibility of corruption, right? And this is something that, yes, we need to carefully think about. But I do think there are, there are mechanisms that we can devise that would make that not impossible, because there could be certain like alarm procedures or safety mechanisms that would prevent that. And the next question that will come up is, maybe there are a set of decisions, and the first example of that is, of course, the delegate compensation itself, where we have this. It was mentioned in the chat before, like, should delegates even vote on this? Should they recuse themselves from that? Maybe there are a number of things that because delegates are conflicted, that is something that MKR holders should vote directly on, or something like that, or that at least delegates can't change it without creating enough visibility, so that if they try to change it and it's against the wishes of the MKR holders, that there's enough time to remove their voting power, something like that. So I think, if we look at political structures, there are solutions to these, but I do agree it's definitely something to be careful about, and we need to make sure that the necessary checks and balances are in place. I personally don't think that delegates, indeed not in a vacuum, but delegates developing their own vision and strategy and trying to be elected on that platform, I don't think that's a contradiction to that. I think it actually it would help a lot.
And it's bringing up a good point there. This came up as a panel discussion. Youth Timber, one of the panels I was sitting on, was the fact that a governance attack often can look quite similar to like a legitimate governance action, right? Like if we normalize delegates proposing things and then voting on them, right? There's not too much of a difference between like something a delegate earnestly believes is good for the protocol versus something that's quote unquote taking advantage of the protocol.
Yeah, and just to clarify again, to make sure that I'm not misunderstood. So the proposal that a delegate would make is exactly what the MKR holders would vote on, right? Because they propose their vision and strategy. The MKR holders, they vote on the vision and strategy. It's not the delegates voting on that, because the vote there is the act of delegating MKR to the delegate that you believe in, or their platform that you believe in. The MIPs that the delegates voted on, that is an entirely different matter. And I agree that there we need to be careful and make sure that the necessary safety mechanisms are in place, that the separation of powers, checks and balances are all respected.
Right, and that's a good point too, that the more information, right, the more close to a vision that is conveyed in a delegate platform, like the closer we are to when MKR voters delegate to them, right? We have this assumption that, okay, well, they've clearly laid out what they're going to be using that MKR for, and then got MKR delegated to them because of that. Right, so it's a bit of a stronger signal than perhaps the groundwork we've laid out so far.
Yeah, I have one last comment to connect it to the initiative that we presented last week. So there was a lot of yeah, I'm traveling, and there was a lot of time that was lost last week, but we're going forward, of course, with the initiative that was presented last week, which is basically an experiment. It is inspired by the cross-core unit coordination initiatives that we've seen around L2 collateral management on-chain, collateral management off-chain, and the security, because everyone recognizes that more coordination is needed. So with the initiative that we presented last week, this will be the first time where we have a coordination process that brings both core units and delegates together, and delegates are an explicit stakeholder in that process. And I hope that we can use the discussion about resilience, better resilience of MakerDAO on an operational and financial level to try and come to emergent strategy and vision, and have those discussions. So with all the delegates that are interested, and then at the same time make sure that it's transparent so that everyone can see what is happening. The Discord channel has been created and is available, or is accessible for everyone. I think like every MakerDAO Discord user. And the next step, so I've outlined a number of bullet points, the way that I would like to work on this as facilitator of the coordination process. I'll be reaching out to individual delegates to have individual conversations, because we can't have one big group of people that do everything together. That's not efficient. Instead, as facilitator, I'll reach out to the individuals, and then we will have regular meetings. I was thinking maybe a little bit longer meeting than usual, 1.5 hours, 2 hours, but not every week. Rather every 2 weeks, maybe even every 3 if it's enough, to bring all the results together from those individual discussions. And at the same time, think in practice about the resiliency mechanisms that we can use to improve resiliency of MakerDAO, and also connected to those higher level vision and strategy that hopefully I hope the delegates will play a big role in. So yeah, if you were unaware of the initiative, then make sure to check the Discord channel, watch the recording from last week's GNR call, and I'll before the end of this week, I will post the outline of the plan and start reaching out to people. Also, I'm here with a number of other MakerDAO members, so we'll also start to have a couple of in-person conversations as a starting point there as well.
It's better. See some asking for the link on the forum topic there. If someone gets the chance to post that, that'd be great. Couldn't find it in a few minutes there. Excellent. I am noting the time here. We are coming up against when we like to wind down these calls. If you have any last questions, comments, or concerns, be a great time to bring them up. And see Porter's hopping off. Thanks so much for attending and presenting. We really appreciate the time. I get one with the fast forward signal too. I love it. All right. Well, in that case, really appreciate everyone coming out and participating in this call. It's really great to have so many different perspectives shared live. I know virtually we don't always get the chance to do so. So thank you for those of you that were able to participate. Look forward to doing it again next week.